They were trapped in a white cage of ice for months, one by one. They became the only source of fuel for the last survivor. This is the raw truth about the man-eater of Colorado. The wind screams like a dying animal against the canvas walls. Inside the tent, the air smells of old copper and frozen rot. A single match flares, illuminating a pair of frost-bitten hands that shake so violently the flame dies in a hiss. Beyond the thin fabric, the darkness of the San Juan Mountains feels solid, a heavy weight pressing down on the lungs. There is no wood left for the fire. Only the sound of teeth chattering against a cracked tin cup remains in the void. A shadow shifts in the corner of the small shelter. It is the silhouette of a man hunched over something wet and dark. The rhythmic sound of a knife scraping against a hard, white surface echoes through the cramped space. The blade slips, carving a jagged line through leather and frozen skin. No one cries out. The silence between the survivors is thicker than the ice outside. They have forgotten the sound of their own voices, replaced by the gnawing of hunger. Steam rises from a shallow iron pot sitting over the last embers. There is no flour. There are no beans. The liquid inside is thin and gray, swirling with the grease of a mystery that no one dares to name aloud. Alfred stares at the man across from him. The blue eyes of his companion are vacant, staring through the tent wall at a world that has already abandoned them. A string of raw sinew hangs from a split lip, unmoving and cold. The fire finally blinks out, plunging the scene into absolute blackness. The scraping sound stops for a heartbeat. Then, the wet tearing of fabric and flesh begins again in the dark, steady and purposeful as a heartbeat. Outside, the blizzard buries the camp under 10 feet of suffocating white powder. The horses are gone. The maps are ash. All that remains is the cold iron of a hatchet and the terrible necessity of the knife. The year is 1873, and the city of Salt Lake glows with the false heat of ambition. Men gather in smoky saloons to trade whispers of yellow veins sleeping beneath the San Juan peaks. Gold is a fever that ignores the calendar. It turns sensible men into gamblers who bet their lives against the sky. Alfred Packer stands among them with eyes like burning coals and a tongue that speaks of shortcuts. 20 men listen to his promises, but only 5 step forward into the shadow of the mountains. They are Miller and Bell and Humphrey and Noon and the elder Israel Swan. They carry heavy packs and heavier dreams. The group moves south toward the high country as the autumn sun grows pale. They reach the camp of Chief Ouray, where the smoke of cedar fires drifts into a sky the color of a bruised plum. The chief watches the white men with eyes that have seen 1,000 winters. He points toward the jagged horizon where the clouds gather like an invading army. He tells them, the heavy snow is coming soon. Ouray warns that the peaks are a graveyard for those who do not wait for spring. He offers them meat and a place by the fire until the sun returns to warm the frozen valleys of the territory. Packer looks at the peaks and sees only the time he will lose by waiting. He mocks the warnings of the old man. His hunger for the strike is greater than his respect for the mountain or the storm. The group declines the hospitality of the Ute people and turns toward the high passes. They believe they can beat the ice. They believe the trail will remain open for just one more week of travel. As they climb higher, the air turns thin and sharp as a razor. The horses struggle through the rising drifts, while the wind begins to hum a low and mournful tune through the skeleton branches of the pines. The trail vanishes beneath a fresh layer of white powder. 1 mile feels like 10 miles. The men stop talking to save their breath as the atmosphere becomes a physical weight against their shivering chests and tired limbs. The first storm hits with the force of a falling mountain. It wipes out the sun and turns the world into a spinning chaos of gray and white. There is no longer a path to follow forward. The golden dream dissolves into a struggle for the next inch of ground. They are trapped in the high country with winter locking the door behind them. The point of no return is buried under the frost. The mountain becomes a wall of jagged glass. The men crawl through the white throat of Inman Gulch as the winter of 1874 settles into their marrow. Every step is a heavy struggle against a world that has turned solid. The trail is a memory buried under 10 feet of drifts. They look for the landmarks Packer promised, but find only the indifferent faces of the pines. The horses are the first to surrender to the impossible weight of the journey. The animals fall with a sound like snapping timber. Their breath rises in thin plumes before their eyes glaze over with the frost. There is no ceremony in the slaughter. The men use their knives with hands that have forgotten warmth. They eat the stringy meat of the pack animals until the bones are picked clean. The starvation is a living thing inside their bellies. It is a slow fire that consumes their strength and then begins to gnaw on their very minds. The last of the flour is gone. A handful of coffee beans is the only treasure left in the bottom of a stained canvas bag. They boil the leather of their own saddles to create a bitter soup that tastes of dust. Israel Swan is the oldest among them. His face is a map of deep lines filled with the grime of the trail. One morning, he does not rise from the shared blankets. His body is a stiff statue of blue skin and ice. The survivors stare at the corpse as the wind howls through the canyon. The realization of their trap is a physical blow to the chest. The shortcut is now a cage made of granite and frozen water, with no key. Despair settles over the camp like a thick fog. They are no longer gold seekers or pioneers. They are ghosts moving through a white purgatory. The first death has broken the invisible seal of their shared humanity in the wild. Packer watches the others with a hollow gaze. He sees the weakness in their trembling limbs and the terror in their dilated pupils. The cold has stripped away the civilization they brought from the valley below the peaks. They begin to eat the pine bark and the roots they dig from the frozen mud. Their teeth bleed and their gums blacken from the rot of the mountain. The silence of the peaks is louder than any human scream could ever be. The sun is a cold coin that offers no heat to the shivering group. They are lost in a landscape that does not recognize their names. The hunger is no longer a shadow. It is the only passenger left on the trail. The camp becomes a butcher shop in the clouds. The thin walls of the tent shudder under the weight of a storm that has lasted for an eternity. Inside, the air is thick with the scent of wood smoke and something sweet and heavy. The menu of pine bark and leather boots has reached its end. The hunger is no longer a dull ache in the gut. It is a screaming beast that has torn through the floorboards of their souls. The men look at each other and see only meat. Ouray is the next to fall. He slips into the long sleep of the exhausted and never wakes. Before his heart has even stopped cooling, the knives are out. The sharpening of steel against stone is the only prayer offered in the dark. Alfred Packer moves with the mechanical grace of a predator. He carves the first steaks from the thigh with a hand that does not tremble. The red steam rises from the flesh as it meets the biting air of the mountain night. They stop being men and become simple calculations of calories. Every joint and every muscle is weighed against the distance to the next valley. The transition is silent and absolute. The morality of the world below has frozen and shattered like glass. The campsite is littered with the debris of a human harvest. Strips of skin are hung to dry near the embers. The iron pot hums with the gray broth that swirls with the grease of those who once shared the same golden dreams. Miller and Noon watch Packer through the haze of their own fading senses. Their eyes are hollow pits of shadow in faces that have collapsed into bone and gristle. They chew on the remains of their friends with a rhythmic and terrible focus. The physical decay is a slow rot. Their gums turn black and their teeth loosen in the sockets. Hair falls out in clumps on the blankets. The madness is a dark companion that sits between them by the fire and whispers of survival. Packer finds a strange clarity in the carnage. His epilepsy retreats into the shadows as he fuels his body with the high protein of the camp. He watches the others wither, while he remains upright and alert in the swirling snow. The wind screams through the pass like 1,000 vengeful ghosts. It carries the scent of the camp down the slopes. But there is no one to hear the story. The sky is a flat slate of gray that offers no hope of a thaw. By the fire, the piles of discarded remains grow taller than the wood supply. The men have become the very thing they feared in the dark. They are the monsters of the peaks, and the mountain watches with an indifferent and frozen eye. The mountain air has turned into a thin soup of ice and silence. Only two shadows remain inside the tattered walls of the shelter. Alfred Packer and Wilson Bell sit on opposite sides of a dying fire that gasps for air. The brotherhood of the trail has been replaced by a paralyzing paranoia. Every movement is a threat. Every blink is a window of vulnerability. They are two wolves in a cage of white granite, watching for a single moment of weakness. Bell is a ghost with a hatchet. His eyes are wide and rimmed with red fire. He does not speak, but his breath comes in ragged hitches that sound like a saw cutting through dry wood. He watches Packer with a terrifying hunger. The tension is a physical wire stretched to the breaking point. Packer grips his rifle with fingers that have turned the color of lead. He knows that the last man standing is the only man who will ever see the green valleys. The incident happens in a heartbeat of chaos. According to the survivor, the madness finally breaks the dam of Belly's mind. The man lunges across the embers with his hatchet raised high. His scream is a sound from a different world. The shadow of the blade dances against the canvas wall like a giant crow. Packer does not hesitate. He raises the iron barrel and pulls the cold trigger. The flash of the muzzle is a sun that burns for a fraction of a second. The roar of the shot echoes through the canyon and rolls across the frozen peaks. Bell falls back into the snow with a heavy thud. The last human life besides Packer, his own, is extinguished in the dirt and the frost. Silence returns to the campsite, but it is heavier than before. Packer stands over the body of his last companion while the rifle smoke curls into the freezing air. He is the king of a graveyard. He is the lone survivor. The hunger returns with a renewed and terrible ferocity. Packer sits by a massive fire fueled by the last of their gear. He begins the work of the knife on the final enemy. The feast is solitary and grim. In the dark, he surrounds himself with 5 distinct piles of remains. Each pile is a testament to a man who once dreamed of gold. He eats to live, while the blizzard buries the evidence of his deeds under a blanket of pure white. The mountain watches the lonely feast with an indifferent eye. Packer is no longer a man of the world below. He has become a creature of the high peaks, carved out of blood and iron, and the desperate will to remain. He waits for the thaw with a stomach full of his own kind. The fire casts long dancing shadows that look like ghosts dancing on the edge of the camp. He is alone in the white prison, and he is finally satisfied. The sun of April 1874 rises with a cruel clarity over the San Juan range. The ice begins to weep. The heavy snow retreats to reveal the secrets hidden in the shadows of the gulch. A group of surveyors moves through the thawing wilderness like ghosts in a landscape of mud and bone. They find the campsite at the place that will forever be known as Cannibal Plateau. The silence there is different. The investigators do not find a tragedy of nature, but a carefully organized charnel house. They find skulls with the tops sawn off. They find long bones split open for the marrow. The evidence is etched in the calcium. Forensic truth emerges from the dirt as the spring heat intensifies. The skinning was precise. The stripping of the flesh was the work of a man who was not merely desperate, but methodical in his hunger. The shadow of the cannibal stretches across the history of the territory. Alfred Packer stands behind the iron bars of a cell, while the world outside demands a life for a life. The courtroom is a theater of horror. The judge speaks the famous words of condemnation that will echo for over a century. He curses the man who ate the majority of the local voting population. The sentence is death, but the rope never finds its mark. Packer survives the trial and the decades that follow. He becomes a folk legend and a curiosity. He spends his final years as a quiet man who refuses to eat meat. The iron irony of his life is complete. He dies in 1907, leaving behind a name that is synonymous with the darkness of the human heart. He is buried under a simple stone, while the mountains continue to stand guard over his secrets. The peaks of the San Juan remain indifferent to the crimes committed in their shadows. The wind still screams through the passes, and the snow still buries the unwary. The mountain does not judge. It only waits. The legacy of the man-eater is a stain on the golden dream of the West. It is a reminder that civilization is a thin coat that falls away when the cold is deep, and the belly is empty. Today, the plateau is beautiful and still. Green grass grows where the iron pot once boiled with a gray broth of bone and sinew. The trees have covered the scars of the hatchet and the rifle shot. But the story remains rooted in the soil. It is a grim reflection of what remains when everything else is stripped away. Only the mountain knows the full truth of the long winter in the high country.